A series which started with labels of being the scariest game in years has in recent times been regarded as a childish mascot horror franchise. In 9 years, the FNAF games have been through major changes and tone shifts, which have revolutionized the FNAF franchise. Why has this shift occurred? Have we just grown up and therefore the games don't scare us anymore? Or is this all a strange paradox? By now, you have probably heard the story of how an unknown indie developer named Scott Cawthon would completely change the horror landscape. The early stages of FNAF were built on a horror survival approach, which tested the player's power management and observation skills. Scott created tension in his game by adding unsettling ambience and deeply unnerving art designs and visuals, which differentiated this game to many other indie horror games at the time. A lot of the story wasn't told to us directly. Instead, we the player picked up the pieces as we played, with clues being spread around the cameras, which is how the community would find the missing children posters, which painted the picture for the game's dark tone. One of FNAF 1's biggest achievements is how it took a friendly, comforting environment like a pizzeria and turned it into a horrific, tense scenario. To this day, FNAF 1 remains as a masterclass in horror and how subverting expectations can lead to horrific scenarios. YouTubers such as Markiplier, MatPat, and many others would shed light on the game, which bring much attention to the at the time small indie project. The common incentive was this game was one of the scariest games out there.
The scariest game of all creation.
And at the time it was. It's kinda hard to explain the effect this game had on indie horror games, as the magnitude of change it brought to the landscape is genre changing. This genre change would evolve and would become the blueprint to the mascot horror genre. No one, and I mean no one, expected or saw this game coming, which made it all the more exciting when a sequel would be announced only a few months later. All expectations were high for this upcoming release. Scott acknowledged this challenge and cooked up one of the most genre-defining games ever, even more game-changing than the predecessor. FNAF 2 heightened the stakes with a new expanded cast of animatronics, which was a welcoming addition to the franchise. Characters like the puppet, Mangle, and the toy animatronics would set a more refined and new take on the original cast of animatronics. One of FNAF 2's big selling points was the gameplay change of having no doors. The community had gotten so used to this power-conserving playstyle. Scott just threw a curveball, which is something that would happen often with the games. Evolution, as some would put it, changing the games to allow for new gameplay encounters. Without a doubt, the most important feature of FNAF 2 was the lore. This is the changing point, and even to this day, the story of the purple guy is still being shown. 5 kids go missing in the Freddy's pizzeria. The spirits of the kids get trapped in the metal bodies of the animatronics. Even if you don't know FNAF, you still would probably know about this concept. It simply is such a horrific fate, which drives such mystery to the mascots of Freddy's. Each encounter felt personal, with the hollow endoskeleton bodies flashing rapidly in front of you. This trend of possession and mystery would last up all the way to FNAF 6, also known as Pizzeria Simulator. By now, we had seen multiple dozens of animatronics with a key relation to one another. They were possessed by something. By the end of FNAF 6, we are met with the end. A fire which would free the trapped spirits of the remaining animatronics. This would conclude the main games and give a solid ending to Five Nights at Freddy's, until we would see the inclusion of Ultimate Custom Night, and later the genre changer Help Wanted. Where the older games focused on tense gameplay and, most importantly, telling a thrilling story of an insane man, the tone shift would implement sci-fi elements which heavily impacted the way the games felt. Whether it's canon or not, Glitchtrap is clearly the ideology the newer games would take. The idea that mystery is a core component of the story. We don't know who the entity is, but through lore tapes and context, we learn that the entity is simply a digitized William Afton, a character who had been killed and sentenced to eternal purgatory, reincarnated, as you can imagine, is quite puzzling. The story of the original games are now put into question, with the inclusion of this quote.
The majority of them were total fabrications from the mind of a complete lunatic. Lawsuits pending. But we aren't above laughing at ourselves.
Reasonably, this trend would continue and only be elevated in the newly released Security Breach, which was the first time the franchise was deemed childish. Why was this? I mean, the game had toned down the horror elements and instead focused on adding scale and flashy animatronic designs. But is this the reason this game is seen as how it is? Or are we the community the ones who have finally grown out of the mascot horror genre? From the very start, the FNAF community had found ways to extinguish the horror elements of the games. This is to be expected, as subverting expectations is what made the games so intriguing. Through characterizing the animatronics with the countless of FNAF videos posted online, this would already begin the subversion of the genre. It just wasn't Scott making the calls, and instead, we found new ways to view the animatronics, adding stories and memeing the characters to the point of having the pinnacle event of the games, the Bite of 87, being now a well-recognized meme. Although context is needed, obviously for this case it was the Bite of 83, and with Markiplier saying the Bite of 87, yeah, you get the point. All in all, are we the ones that caused this change? At the time, FNAF's largest audience was kids, and still to this day, FNAF's largest audience is, well, kids. So when these kids grow up, well, the reputation of the FNAF games become one of being not scary. Me being included in this age demographic, looking back, it's clear my perception of the franchise now is that it's a little childish. All good stories must come to an end, and this also applies to FNAF. Once that fire lit, the end of a beloved franchise just wouldn't sit. More games would have to be released. To pull the plug would be killing the FNAF franchise. So more games would be released, and with so much content and history, the key components of the games would need to avoid repetition and potentially boring the community. Characters like Helpy I find extra interesting, as it's not due to the animatronic being interesting or even scary for that matter, which made it so popular. The entire purpose of Helpy is a meme that is widely known in the FNAF community. Helpy is the first sign of the tone change which would later occur. Its presence is there only for comedic relief and nothing more. The most important feature of Helpy is its personality. Helpy is always upbeat and happy. Before this, only Springtrap had somewhat of a personality, being William Afton, and also Baby has a personality in Sister Location. But now the mystery of the characters is different. This is where Security Breach comes in. With the community's newly appointed meme mascot, it was only time until we would see more human-like animatronics. Introducing Glamrock Freddy. We find in Security Breach that Glamrock Freddy is actually here to help us. In a game that is meant to antagonize these animatronics, finally having a friendly animatronic is subverting expectations. You see where I'm getting at? This subversion of expectation is what causes the common belief in the newer games being less scary. And it's true, not only is having the very things you are meant to least want to come in contact with friendly, it is extremely ironic. It removes a lot of the substance which made the original possessed robots frightening. Whether us, the community, boast this change, or this was just a natural evolution of the franchise, it is clear what made the old game scary has been forgotten or simply replaced with new concepts. From where the games stand now, it is clear the direction is heading toward more sincere and sci-fi elements. Quick thing, this video is being scripted before the release of the FNAF movie, hence I will refer to it in future tense. The FNAF movie is looking to continue this trend, however pay a homage to the darker roots of the franchise with the inclusion of a clearly revamped version of William Afton. Will this be a turning point, another subversion of our expectations, or a deeper wound in the already fading horror of a once acclaimed horror classic? In retrospect, the FNAF games are parodies of itself. Ever since the first game in 2014, we see a familiar cast in each installment. Even where the franchise tried branching off into more gruesome and personal animatronics, the over-reliance in showing these characters has given new interpretations of presenting the animatronics. Security Breach is the worst culprit of this. Let's look at the main game and forget the DLC, which I will touch on later. Vanny is an evolution of William Afton's character arc. She is mysterious and isn't really present in the majority of the base game. A character who seemingly was forgotten in the course of their own game. Why is this? If we look into Vanny's origins, we see a common occurrence in this franchise, bringing back old faces to retell already told stories. This all leads to William Afton, the main antagonist of this franchise. Seemingly, at first, he is merely a catalyst to drive more provoking lore to the missing children incident. However, as time grew on, the character was given more depth, and eventually even being voiced by PJ Haywood in Pizzeria Simulator. Through this period, we see an evolution of a character, which was completely disregarded in the events of Help Wanted, with the inclusion of Glitchtrap. We see a new interpretation of William Afton, one who is more ominous and secretive. This is a callback to the older games, where characters were shown to be mysterious. This character, for what it is meant to be good. But a key issue in Glitchtrap is the fact that it is a representation of an already finished character, one whose arc was already established and wrapped up a few games prior. So attempting to reboot the character removes its intrigue and mysteriousness, and instead has people questioning if the franchise can survive without the inclusion of William Afton. This carries on into Security Breach, where again William Afton returns in the form of Burntrap. Like before, the inclusion of this character feels unwarranted and purely there for fan service. This doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, it depends on the context. In this case, we are given a newly fleshed out character, whose story is one that puts a nice twist on William's story. Instead of focusing on this newly fleshed out character, the focus stuck to William, who was essentially the mastermind behind the events of Security Breach. This, however, would be retconned in Rune, which is why I have left it to this portion of the video. Retcons are actually more common than you think in the FNAF timeline. In fact, it has already happened multiple times, in this case in FNAF 4 and well, Help Wanted. So why is this? Well, simply, the story of FNAF is constantly evolving, as well with the core gameplay of the games. With new entries to the series comes new ideas, and with that, eventually you run into a problem. The story overlaps itself and attempts to tell a retelling of the older games. This applies to Security Breach and Help Wanted. Games which are setting up new lore end up completely retelling the same story. Glitchtrap is let loose and begins to manipulate Vanessa. Then in Security Breach, Glitchtrap attempts to be put into a physical form, being Burntrap. Its key ideas are that William Afton is coming back to life, and this would be fine if the older games hadn't made it crystal clear he is stuck in eternal purgatory. So yeah, having a character who is meant to be dead and then be completely rebooted, then being the central part of the newer games, can make for a lot of backlash. And indeed, this backlash happened, with a common saying, "I always come back," accompanied by this image being a widespread laughingstock for the FNAF community. A character who once instilled fear in the fans is now a joke, and this is, well, not good. So Steelwool pulls the plug and retcons this ending, and with that, the Rune DLC begins to save what is a completely insane reboot of the series. This is where the Mimic comes in, and honestly, it succeeds in what it was meant to be, actually scary. And I don't mean having 5 layers of razor sharp teeth. Its whole story is one that is painful, being made out of pure love from its creator to help its son, being then brutally destroyed by the same person that made it after a tragic incident, and now being completely isolated from anyone. It actually has a clear backstory, and it is a fresh take on the FNAF formula, and is not associated with William Afton. I mean, not yet at least. So what does this mean? Well, it means deeply thoughtful and chilling stories can still be told. However, whether it follows the principle of the older games or branches into new avenues of storytelling, innovation will always be present. As with a franchise like FNAF, stagnant ideas will only lead further into the FNAF rabbit hole, until eventually it becomes a complete shell of its former self. The FNAF that we know wouldn't be the same without these memes. Through it, the community can express the games in a way that feels natural. FNAF has evolved, and I believe the key reason for the game's ultimate success is its ability to adapt and change. That about wraps up today's video. If you enjoyed the video, smash a like, and if you don't want to miss out on any new uploads, please consider subscribing as well. And until next time, take it easy and goodbye.